Order, order. Evening, ladies and gentlemen.
The Draft Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme Amendment Number 2 Order 2024.
We'll get there in a minute. Members, gentlemen, may, if they wish to, if they're hardy or foolhardy enough, remove their jackets. Minister to move the motion.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair as always, Sir Roger. I beg to move that the committee has considered the draft Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme Amendment Number 2 Order 2024. The order was laid before Parliament on 22nd of October 2024. And to give a little bit of background, the UK Emissions Trading Scheme was established under the Climate Change Act 2008 by the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme Order 2020 as a UK-wide greenhouse gas emissions trading scheme contributing to the UK's emissions reduction targets and net zero goal. The scheme is run by the UK ETS Authority, a joint body comprising the UK Government and the devolved governments. Our aim is to be predictable and responsible guardians of the scheme and its markets. We've brought forward this SI to enable several important changes and improvements to the scheme. It resets the UK ETS cap to be in line with the top of the net zero consistent range. The cap sets a limit on how many allowances can be created over the trading period, which runs from 2021 to 2030, and in each year. And this level reduces over time to drive down total emissions. When the scheme was established, the cap for the legislated period of the UK ETS, which as I said runs 2021 to 2030, was set at 5% below the UK's expected notional share of the EU ETS cap for the same period. However, this was not consistent with the UK's net zero trajectory for the traded sector. This instrument brings the overall UK ETS cap in line with our net zero target and carbon budgets under the Climate Change Act. This instrument also reduces the industry cap, which is the total number of allowances which can be made available to existing installations for free if no cross-sectoral correction factor mitigation is applied. For the industry cap, this SI reduces the absolute level of the industry cap while increasing its proportion of the overall cap. While the share of allowances set aside for this purpose will increase from 37% to 40%, the reduction in the overall UK ETS cap means that industry cap will fall. This helps to mitigate carbon leakage risk across participating sectors while still maintaining an effective incentive to decarbonise. The amendments also create a flexible reserve of allowances for maintaining market stability and sufficient carbon leakage mitigation. In addition to allowances specifically created for this reserve, unallocated free allowances from the industry cap and designated free allowances that are returned by operators due to changes in participant eligibility or activity level reductions will also stock the flexible reserve. The flexible reserve can be used to increase allowance supply for market stability purposes if the cost containment mechanism is triggered. The flexible reserve can also mitigate application of the CSCF, a uniform reduction to all eligible existing participants' free allocation in the case that the eligibility for free allocation exceeds the industry cap. Come on now to venting and flaring. Under current legislation, carbon dioxide released through flaring in the upstream oil and gas sector is included in the UK ETS as it is within the scope of the regulated activity of combustion. This SI introduces CO2 released through venting in the upstream oil and gas sector into the scope of the UK ETS for installations already covered by the scheme. This means that such emissions will be subject to a carbon price too. The control processes of venting and flaring can sometimes be essential for safety purposes. They are also used in more routine situations where the hydrocarbon, oil and gas are unable to be used, exported or re-injected without the CO2 being removed. The removed CO2 can then be released in the processes of flaring where waste gas, including the stripped out CO2 as well as combustible elements, is ignited, and venting where unignited gas is released through a vent. This legislation removes a perverse incentive where operators could routinely vent gas containing carbon dioxide without it being subjected to a carbon price, which if flared would constitute reportable emissions for the purpose of this scheme. On to Northern Ireland now. In line with the original policy intent, this instrument extends legislative amendments made by the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme Amendment Number 2 Order 2023 to Northern Ireland. Those amendments include capping aviation free allocation at 100% of emissions, clarifying the treatment of carbon capture and storage plants, and amendments to free allocation rules for electricity generation. In 2022, a memorandum of understanding between the UK and Swiss governments was signed, setting out the intention to include flights from the UK to Switzerland in the UK ETS. Such flights were brought into the UK ETS scope on 1st January 2023 by the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme Amendment No. 3 Order 2022. This instrument today extends the scope to cover flights departing from an aerodrome in Northern Ireland and arriving to an aerodrome in Switzerland. On enforcement and penalties, scheme regulators are responsible for enforcing compliance, including operational functions such as issuing penalties. This instrument makes a number of amendments to the level of scheme penalties to ensure consistency and proportionality of enforcement for all operators. It also introduces a new deficit notice with an associated penalty to strengthen enforcement of the fundamental scheme obligation to surrender allowances equal to an operator's annual emissions. Finally, this instrument makes several corrections and clarifications to existing legislation. These changes follow appropriate and comprehensive consultation with stakeholders. In the Developing the UK ETS consultation in 2022, the UK ETS Authority considered proposals on changes to the rules for sectors covered by the UK ETS to ensure more greenhouse gas emissions were covered by the scheme, along with changes to the cap. The Authority response to this consultation was published in two parts, in August 2022 and July 2023. A majority of respondents agreed with the UK ETS Authority proposals on creating a flexible share reserve of allowances, on bringing venting into the upstream oil and gas sector into the scope of the ETS, and on the addition of a new penalty and deficit notice. Several respondents expressed concern regarding the reduction of the cap and the changes to the industry cap. An assessment of these responses informed the decision to set the cap at the top of the net zero consistent range. Between 23rd of February 2024 and 8th of March 2024, the UK ETS Authority ran a targeted consultation on the minor penalty amendments. Responses to this consultation were in broad agreement with the proposals or noted they were not affected by them. The Authority response has been published in advance of the laying of this instrument. To conclude, Sir Roger, these changes deliver on commitments made by the UK ETS Authority and improve the operation of the scheme. The alterations to the UK Emissions Trading Scheme will support its role as a key pillar of the UK's climate policy. They show that we will take action to extend and improve the scheme where necessary. I commend this order to the committee.
The question is, the committee has considered the draft Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme Amendment No. 2 Order 2024. Opposition from the bench, Andrew Bowie.
Thank you very much, Sir Roger. It is, as ever, a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and nothing could give me greater pleasure than to be here this evening discussing this SI. The previous government brought in the emission trading scheme into UK law to provide continuity in the transition under Brexit, with our framework becoming operational from January 2021. We did so to provide a mechanism for industry to reduce emissions using cap and trade to allow the market to take responsibility for our journey towards net zero. Today's amendment, as we have heard from the Minister, brings a number of changes to the legislation, expanding the scope to include flights from Northern Ireland to Switzerland in line with the Great British Standard, which was not previously possible due to the absence of the Northern Ireland Assembly, and bringing the carbon dioxide venting from upstream oil and gas installations under the scheme. This amendment also enacts the reduction in cap on allowances, as well as strengthening enforcement and penalties for non-compliance, introducing the deficit notice. This amendment also accounts for the reserve price for stability during excessive market volatility. In the introduction of the scheme in 2020, Sir Roger, it was decided that the purpose of the UK-wide Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme was to encourage cost-effective emissions reductions which will contribute to the UK's emissions reduction targets and net zero goal. So today we address the amendments in the context of satisfying that ambition. I know we all have a common ambition when it comes to tackling climate change. The introduction of the cap and trade scheme was a component of our national effort towards this. However, as we know, this comes at a cost and with inevitable trade-offs. We have seen recently that the Labour government's climate policies take precedence over any financial or economic concerns, be that damage being done to the North Sea oil and gas industry with the extension and increase to EPL, and the ending of investment allowances, the £58 billion cost the Secretary of State's plans to decarbonise the grid, and the new ambition for an 81% reduction in emissions by 2035, with no detail on how that will be achieved. And on that point, I would ask the Minister if she would clarify whether it is indeed this government's policy to see the carbon price rise to £147, as necessitated by the NISO report, and if so, what assessment has been made of the impact on employment, on industry and on households of that huge increase. Specifically on this SI, in the context of the government's overall energy strategy, we have serious concerns about the direction of travel, particularly when it comes to Labour government's continued attack on our North Sea industry. The SI tonight includes upstream oil and gas sector activities such as carbon dioxide venting within the scope of the UK ETS. And whilst this may incentivise lower emissions, it imposes significant new costs on companies already navigating a complex and changing regulatory environment. There is also concern regarding carbon leakage, that as a result of the growing burdens on the North Sea, companies will see an exodus to more price-competitive, unregulated markets for production, and this does not reduce emissions overall, but does ensure that the UK sees none of the benefits. The Minister spoke about the protections against carbon leakage. I would be grateful for some more detail on that, if she would be so kind summing up. His Majesty's Opposition would like to put on record our concerns regarding the Government's direction of travel on this, and urge them to look again at the scale of anti-industry measures being continued levied on the North Sea, for the sake of employment and the economy, for the supply chain companies investing in new clean technologies, and for our energy security and further investment, and to the employers and investment that will suffer as a result. We will be voting against this aside this evening.
Okay. I thank the Shadow Minister for his contribution to the debate. As I said, the UK Emissions Trading Scheme is a key pillar of the UK's net zero policy regime. I'm slightly surprised by the Shadow Minister deciding to come here today, well, perhaps not from a political point of view, but from the view that I'm pretty sure that if he was still in the department occupying the post that I am now, he would have been supporting these measures, because, as I said, they're very much just about making sure that the scheme retains its credibility and it moves forward and adapts to circumstances. And as I said, with Northern Ireland, it's absolutely common sense that with the Northern Ireland Assembly established, I'm glad he agrees with me that on venting and flaring, it seems to me absolutely common sense that they would be treated in the same way. He asked a specific question about the pricing. As the market conveners, we cannot comment on the price. And I think I would probably leave it at that, other than say the market determines the price of the allowances, and by opting for the top of the net zero consistent range, more allowances will be available while still delivering against our net zero trajectory. He brought up also some broader issues about carbon leakage. Again, I think there'll be plenty of opportunities to debate this, but we are absolutely committed to provide certainty to industry around the steps we will take to protect against carbon leakage, and that is why in July 2023 we set out the overall level of free allocations that we provided from 2026. We have since consulted on how best to target those free allocations from the next allocation period to ensure the smooth functioning of the market and the continued protection of at-risk sectors. As the Shadow Minister will know, the UK Government has also announced that from 2027 a UK CBAM will be in place for certain at-risk sectors, and the authority has consulted on aligning free allocation charges with the start of that CBAM. So I can give them assurances that the UK ETS authority will work with the UK Government to ensure that a CBAM will work cohesively with the UK ETS, including with free allowances, and that will be something that will no doubt be revisited, perhaps in this very room, over the coming months. So to conclude, Sir Roger, as I've said, this is an absolutely key part of our net zero policy regime. We believe that maintaining a strong UK ETS will play a key role in making Britain a clean energy superpower, delivering our mission of secure and clean electricity by 2030. By driving green investment as part of our industrial strategy, the UK ETS will also help deliver a just transition, growing the UK's economy and securing good jobs for people across the country. As I said, the proposed changes in this SI bring in a net zero consistent cap, and I would remind the Shadow Minister that it was his government that legislated for net zero, and at one point we're very proud of having done that. It also alters the industry cap and expands the scope of the ETS to venting of CO2 within the upstream oil and gas sector. This followed a comprehensive consultation on developing the UK ETS carried out in 2022. The SI delivers these proposals, deliver on commitments made in the response to that consultation in July 2023 when the UK ETS Authority set out a comprehensive package of reforms to the scheme. They have the long-standing support of the 4 governments of the UK. And we, as part of the UK ETS Authority, with the devolved governments, are determined to manage and improve the scheme effectively. Our aim is to be predictable and responsible guardians of the scheme and its markets. We are committed to being attentive to views and carrying forward changes as required to ensure the scheme operates efficiently to achieve emissions reductions. The changes to the UK emissions trading scheme that this SI brings will support its role as a cornerstone of the UK's climate and net zero policy. Therefore, I commend this draft order to the committee.
The question is that the committee has considered the draft greenhouse gas emissions trading scheme amendment number 2 order 2024. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No. Division. Division in room 11. We can lock the doors. Lock the doors.
Where are you?
If the whips are happy to proceed.
Yeah, it's going to. If I say
You only got 4 members.
order. Order.
That's all right. Dr. Rosanna Lynn-Carr.
Aye.
Joanna Baxter.
Aye.
Andrew Bowie.
No.
Sam Carling.
Aye.
Charlie Dewhurst.
No.
Barry Gardner. Ben Goldsborough.
Aye.
Kerry McCarthy.
Aye.
Chris MacDonald.
Aye.
Alex Mayer. John Pearce.
Aye.
Bradley Thomas.
No.
Nick Timothy.
No.
Anna Turley.
Aye.
We're not like that. Yeah. I know. How do you think we feel?
Did you see the result?
Order. The ayes were 10, the noes were 4, so the ayes have it. Order. Order.
Very good.